Welcome into This Week of Missouri Politics Midweek Update Pre-Veto Session Week. We're going to come to you live 11 or noon each day this week. Either me just visiting with you or bringing a guest. This week we have a very historically topical guest, former Senator John Dolan. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I thought news there's plenty to talk about, but all the news we're going to talk about kind of feeds into a story that really you got a front row seat for. Tell folks when you got elected to the Missouri House.
I was elected to the Missouri House in 1996 in the November election from West St. Charles County.
You have Wentzville. Where was West at the time?
It was all of Southwest St. Charles County, and with all the rewrites and growth of that fastest growing county, there are now 6 state rep seats in that one that I served.
So you're the 90s map of St. Charles County for your one district. In 2 more maps, I guess this will be the 3rd map since.
Yeah, I'd say
is 6.
It's a 3rd map in my time, 2 since I've been gone.
So just take a step back. Tell me why. Why is that? That's probably the if you looked at the growth hotspots, that's like the heat part of the entire state. Why?
Oh, it's interesting. There were certain areas of Missouri growing at the time, and St. Charles was far and away. And I always fought with the late Jim Kreider, who just passed, and I went to his funeral. And they always said the fastest growing county in Missouri. He had maybe had per capita with Nixa Branson stuff going on, but without a doubt, by raw numbers, it was always West St. Charles County. It was the migration from our old St. Louis County roots into St. Charles, and Jefferson has seen it. Oh, Franklin and Warren counties have seen it. But by then, it was all to St. Charles, and it was a home builder Hall of Fame.
Where your family from?
I am originally from New York and moved out in 1983 and went to St. Dominic High School, which is a good question for St. Louis. Where'd you go to high school?
Yeah.
I think they're asking, what's your parish? What's your dad's W-2? It's code. But I was out in West St. Charles County, and my district mirrored my experience right on the line of God and Country Democratic farmers, like a Billy Lickenhouse, and families like his, and this new growth. And then I come back 10 years later after my tenure at the CIA, and my father passed. I came home for a graduate degree. I married a Lake St. Louis girl, where I'm from as well, since moving there in 83. So in 93, this starts taking off. I'm a member of 5 or 6 chambers of commerce, and I end up running in a primary against an incumbent in 1996. Both Chuck Ferguson and I defeated, old Chuck Ferguson, defeated less conservative, less involved, you would say, long time or multi-term incumbents. And I went against I was one of the youngest. Paddock was the youngest in our freshman class and still is close to the youngest. I think Lager. There are some really young people, but I was only 29 when I stepped foot.
You're 29 years old.
Yep.
It's 96, right?
It's 1996.
So you're 29. That seat's going to be open in 02, right? Because all the term limit folks were going to kick in.
Yeah, it would have opened up even sooner with this person's term limits would have ended.
Wait?
I didn't have a theory on waiting. I just wanted a more conservative and effective vision for West St. Charles County. I was involved. It was time to take a chance and to do something. Had I not done that, I probably would have went back to the federal agent or intelligence community lifestyle that I started my early career in. So I just took a chance, and I ended up 13 points against a 2-term incumbent.
So what time did you run for Senate? When did you run for Senate?
Senate was 02 in the rewrite, and the rewrite was tailor-made for me.
So 02, did you serve? So you were there
for the takeover.
Was you in a special, or you just?
I was a 96, 98, same opponent, but a 3-way, and then unopposed in 2000. By that time, the Hanaway Jet and Vision Kinderific type of stuff that was going on was really starting to take shape. And you had the 2 special elections of Clinton Cawthorn that made a shared power agreement in the Senate. And here comes Jetton with the PowerPoint and the fundraising and the grassroots politics that really tipped it.
So tell me, I hear Democrats complain about how they're treated by the majority. You served when it was razor thin. I almost think those guys had no choice but to run it like a dictatorship because it was a razor thin majority. But I mean, they were tough on you guys.
Impossible.
These folks have no idea how the Democrats
You'd never get a bill. The minute you had a career, you would not get a bill.
Yes.
And even though I just attended his funeral, I'm very familiar and very good friends with a lot of the Irish Catholic conservative Democrats. And they were mad, and it's a big Missouri history point, that the Carnahans had great grassroots mobilization. They were very liberal. They had Gaw installed, even though he was rural. And there was an alliance between the Black Caucus and the liberal, for lack of a better term, great liberal women of many parts of Missouri. And the party was very left, but the state was not. So those Carnahan years burned up in also the concealed carry issue with Robin Carnahan in 99 on the ballot initiative and Mel Carnahan's consolidation of power. The minute he tragically died, even before, numbers were turning, and we were mercilessly attacked. You couldn't get a consent bill or any bill. There was no bipartisanship.
But when you look back on that,
in public,
what could those guys have done with such a razor-thin majority?
It was.
Do you blame them, really?
The first. Oh no, I good friends with so many Democrats.
If the current crop of Democrats had that majority today, they would do the same stuff as with the Republicans.
I think Democrats have always been better at certain things and Republicans at others. And the Democrats were certainly better at consolidating power, bringing unified votes like Pelosi always did.
40 years
and they nailed it.
Right?
They did. It was aldermanic politics at its best.
Yeah,
and you had the old chieftains from the cities. Once they lost their rural base and then certain city power brokers, it was wide open. And a rewrite, you have to look at those who wrote the maps. The rewrites just absolutely rocked it. And I was one of the takes. My Senate seat was a take.
Who'd you take from?
Ted House.
Ted House's seat?
Yeah, and that was a counted on take in the year of so many of us with different seniority.
Did he go to the judiciary then? Or?
He did. He went to the courts predominantly. In his
always
career.
thought Ted House was a good guy.
He was. He went as strong as it's just still a strong D, but a conservative Democrat, pro-lifer. Him and Billy Lickenhouse were pro-life, pro-gun.
It's funny. St. Charles County used to have a lot of Democrats. Jefferson County used to have all Democrats.
Absolutely.
These were all pro-life, pro-gun Democrats.
And I think if you look at the Yellow Dog Democrat or you look at Manchin today, you got to understand what was happening in these county courthouses throughout Missouri.
Yeah.
You know for sure in southeast Missouri
well, it took a little
how
time.
rich the culture and the dynamics of power were.
In the 80s, they started voting Republican for president, maybe Congress. Then in the 90s, they started considering the state house and ended up voting in the state house the next decade. But it really took Obama coming in to turn those courthouses in southeast Missouri. And a lot of them still would have a Democrat or two. Like there was a beloved county collector that just did a good job. Everybody liked him, and he was at the chili supper.
As he should be.
It took Trump until they couldn't even stomach that guy anymore. And since Trump, it's just there's very,
we're not a
very
bellwether
few left.
since 16. We're not
we're
an absolute red. Us in Kansas are red as they come with some nuances of Wild Wild West.
Well,
and that's what's interesting.
We just have the nuance now because now we've had it for so long that before we get into this, I want to jump forward before we jump back and continue the story. I have some understanding for a guy. Imagine a guy goes and knocks all the doors it takes to get elected, asks for money, goes to the parades. I mean, just good Lord, it is legitimate work to win an open seat. Even today, people in the media, it's one of my pet peeves. They're like, oh, it's not, no. Winning an election, an open seat race. I can't even imagine a take seat, knocking out an incumbent in your own primary. That's a whole nother kettle of fish. But just take a step back and think about running for office. You've helped many people run for office before. It's a hell of a lot of work, and it is competitive, and there's a reason that person got there, right? Whatever it may be, they had to work to get there. But now it's almost to me like you hard charge. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna cut taxes. Like, Charlie, come here and talk to you. Charlie, we've cut taxes like 5 times in 4 years. I mean, the courts are gonna make us raise taxes if we keep doing this because we're not gonna be able to fund schools. They're like, okay, well, I'm gonna get rid of abortion. Charlie, damn. Actually, there are no abortions in Missouri anymore, but that was just stuff we put on your flyer for you, buddy. Sorry. And you're like, well, I'm going to make sure my toddler can buy an Uzi. Charlie, damn, this is going to be disappointing for you because toddlers can buy Uzis now. You run out of stuff to do. So you start to go into I can see the frustration. Everybody that gets elected wants their name on a building or they want Facebook likes. They want to come out with some big proposal. A lot of what you guys would have set out to do in 2001 at a dinner, you kind of done.
That is true. And Governor Blunt proved that in his first term. He said, hey, I'm done. And he went on to an outstanding career in doing other things. And he hit some of the basics. And that's where.
If you're a guy that is out right now, if you're out pounding the pavement trying to get elected that first election, and you've got a interesting fall and spring coming up, once you get elected, it would be you guys had a lot to do.
I would agree entirely.
I almost feel bad for that new guy.
I would think I'm a fully actualized has-been, never was, and I've been out of it longer than I was in it. But what I can tell you is that governance matters, and that getting in there and getting that budget and funding those schools and getting some of those issues.
That, though,
it's
hard.
But you can go to
a young
making
John
things.
Dolan on that.
Well, it's because of highways. my love of highways and coming through the conservative issues of coming back from Guantanamo Bay for an historic, to this day, veto override.
I want to get to that.
That's pro-life and a pro-gun issue. And I shared transportation, and now I'm seeing the very realization of things I dreamed of that I knew would never happen in my tenure.
But day one, at that first summer caucus after you beat that incumbent, if you're walking into this situation, I have a feeling it would have been hard to tell a young, hard-charging John Dolan that, oh, yeah, we've already done all that stuff, but I don't know what to tell you. It would be some of the things that I see legislators do that are clearly just illogical and just silly. I have some sympathy for them where others might not, simply because, I mean, damn, that's a tough draw to come into a party that's had the majority for 20 years, supermajority for 10, the governor's office in the majority for 6. A lot of the stuff that the conservative movement would want to do has been done. And I think that kind of kicks the starch a little bit and creates some of your Kansas-like rivalry, because it's just hard to do.
I think Kansas and Missouri's run into themselves on that. And when people talked of term limits, I heard us saying that, hey, the secretaries and the lobbyists are going to run the joint. I said, not any more than they already do. And that's debatable. But it's the selfish term limit clock that makes you want to run for everything, combined with the clicks. And if you want to make your mark, it's going to be all the next election, I
definitely think lobbyists have more stroke.
Oh, they might. And
than they had before.
And PACs, but fundraising is always modified for the ethical plans or the way. We had multiple committees in the days. We had limits. We had no limits. We had no gift limits.
What was the best one? You've seen them all now. What was the best? What was the best system to truly let folks, if you truly want to know where a candidate's being funded? Because I'll be honest with you, I absolutely think candidates respond. And the funny part is, no one gives you a 5-figure check until they've seen where you really aren't an issue. Nobody gives 5 figures to someone. If you're from that field, then you would have a reason. But if you have to vote on stuff before someone's give you that check. So it's not like, I don't see people 180 for checks.
Right.
But it definitely matters. I mean, it's horseshit to say.
Certain people play certain ways. We've seen large interests. I've been a part of.
It's not partisan. It would be both ways. But I think if you want to find out who financially supports this person, what's the best system for that?
It's full disclosure and no limits. And instead, you put limits on, and reasonable limits are fine per candidates. But when you have the C4s opened up the way they did, you might have a 5-figure check or $1 million PAC, not even technically coordinating with the very candidate they're going to put in office.
And you can look a person in the eye and say, I didn't take that money.
And it's C4. It's completely independent. But it's a better campaign. I had a guy run an ad on me in an independent expenditure for the aforementioned general. So this is 96, and I must be bad because I'm Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole. That's what's coming after me in Clinton's big year. And so he comes in with a successful reelect before his scandals came out, and he dominates. And what dominated mine was independent expenditures in a 49-51 district after my primary. So I won by 163 votes, 1.17%, after dominating a primary by 13 percentage points against a 2-term incumbent. But she had, been from a different area. She was a member of Planned Parenthood, anti-gun, and kind of posing as a moderate Republican when those were allowed. And I just smashed through the wall, knocked 3,000 doors, and August came, and it was over. But then the general election, boy, did that remind me of governance. Getting in and answering your constituent phone call. I was just recently contacted by somebody in my new field of solar energy, and she remembered writing me in my first year as a state rep constituent. And I answered my own phone, and now she's looking for another answer. And I'm going to call her back and give her that answer about solar energy. But in guns, abortion, taxes, women's rights, school policy, anything we've got, energy policy, it's going to be what it's going to be, and you're going to have to meet the moment. And what was great about the veto 20 years ago is that people like Peter Kinder, Mike Gibbons, Rod Jetton, they met that moment in a term limits is coming. Majority has turned over. We've got stuff to do. And in the first year, you saw work comp reform, some pro-life legislation, concealed carry, and you had a governor that would sign it. So what happened, what I would tell young leaders today that gather often, but not often enough maybe, in good, normal conversation like this, I would say, hey, take a look back and see what we had. I'm fortunate to have served with almost every member of our federal delegation, or knew them when they were young and interns even, because, you had some time in the past. But if you look at that, you had a big liberal governor who died tragically, and a Holden who shouldn't have beat talent in that 2000 election. He's in, and we're turning everything. So we are going to override him. Then he loses a primary to McCaskill. and then Blunt comes in
and
signs the bill. Yep, we had to override in 3 and 4, and then we got Blunt to sign so much.
So you
in
get
5.
elected in 2002 to the state senate. You have a pickup seat that
Mm-hmm.
I think wasn't a shock to anybody, but I mean, you had to run a race, right?
Yep.
I mean, it was a full-fledged campaign. They hadn't just totally gave up stakes and moved east yet, but I mean, there was. I don't think that they put the full brunt of their available money behind it because it was kind of trending, right? I mean,
I was 5. Yeah, on the target list, I was 4 or 5, not 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
we had some other work to do and some people to help, and I spread my money around, and others did to get people in. Our class was interesting because you had people that served as long as Delbert Scott and as short as Matt Bartle, and then myself. I had 6 years. Matt had 4. We all came in together with Norma Champion, Charlie Shields, Delbert Scott. We all went to the Senate together. Carl Vogel, all came in as freshmen together.
You talk about a class of Class E people, actual leaders. I mean, you're clicking off Charlie Shields, Carl Vogel. I mean, that's a group of people that take things seriously.
They do.
And but I go back to a little easier to take it seriously when you've been in the minority. I just think it's frankly an easier pull to take the job seriously when you come from the minority like that, and you haven't accomplished things. I mean, you've not all the accomplishments you have. But let's get to the accomplishments. So walk me through session for you. So you come in, hard charging freshman.
Mm-hmm.
What are the bills that you were looking to override first?
Hard charging freshmen in the Senate years. Yep. We come in to an agenda knowing we have a veto-proof majority, knowing that we have an opportunity to do a lot, but that we're going to need a governor to do. We can do a little, but we can do a lot.
How many did you have?
Gosh, it was 23 because 23. We had to have at least 23.
So on 23.
Right on 23, because that's why my one vote was the vote.
We'll get
you had to have the 23.
What did you pass?
I might have 21. I might have 20. It was 34. We definitely, to get a majority, you got to have a certain number. We had the PQ. We had the first PQ of the original concealed carry bill.
21 to override.
First time to PQ in the Senate ever, since 1947. To get the regular bill passed of Larry Crawford's.
Now, walk folks through though. You had concealed carry on the ballot.
So a 1999 effort, and the strength of the Carnahans comes out. One of its last-ditch efforts, if you don't count, you have to count the senator after the tragic death. You have Robin working votes and the corporate structure and pushing corporate people like they are today in the woke kind of way. And it goes down. And Wayne Trump and conservative Democrats were the opposition to Mel Carnahan, Robin Carnahan, and the others.
I was in St. Francis County yesterday, actually, for the big day in Deloge, and I saw Crump for sheriff, and it was I had so many things going on. I was dying to get over there and see if that Crump running for sheriff was a Republican.
What's interesting about the effort,
if somebody knows, if Engler or somebody's watching, I would just be so interested because I saw that name and I knew I didn't know him well, but I was a young guy. I knew who that name was. I knew the guy. I wonder if this Crump running for sheriff is Republican or Democrat. I'll be
when the majority was having its fights. Big time, and we were taking efforts. You'll see in the book The Showdown in the Show Me State, 14 years and the fight for concealed carry laws in Missouri by William T. Horner, who's the head of the political science program at Mizzou now, and he was younger when he wrote the book, but he's now heading up things at Mizzou. And I'm a graduate of that political science program, so it was interesting to see there was a book written about it. I didn't know. It went off more journalistic accounts, but it gets into what Matheson having to go against, Matheson had to go against his governor. Caskey was carrying Crawford's bill because he was a pro-gun Democrat. Gibbons had to vote against 70% majority for this referendum against guns.
So you got 21.
Yep, got 21.
You're going through.
You get through the House.
It comes to the House.
Easy.
Not a big deal.
Oh yeah.
I remember I got to come up that day. I was told, and I didn't even know what
Hanaway was on the fence too. She had Richmond Heights, so her and Gibbons had a lot of pressure of that kind of moderate district.
Neither of them ever get enough credit for this.
And they did what they needed to do, especially Gibbons flipping that vote from a 70% vote in his constituency against the referendum of '99, which failed concealed carry. So then you get votes that say, or court cases that say, can you even do it? And then you get a filibuster in the Senate on the base bill, and Jacob is put down by the PQ in the Senate.
Is that a good argument to you to say, hey, you know what? This thing was put before the public, and they said no.
The book goes into detailing two things.
I mean, you're a logical
Me
guy.
Personally,
you're a person that you can sit down and talk with.
I'm in charge now. I represent my constituents. I have an agenda. I'm going to vote what I'm going to vote. And
but
that
of
the
the
previous
arguments you
vote?
could have made, my assumption is you were totally for the concealed carry. Was that the best argument you could make to you against not doing this?
Doing it was times have changed. We're in charge
3
now.
years?
Oh, absolutely. It was a razor thin majority vote in a.
What would have been a better argument? Let's go back to the public and see what they think.
Oh, you could have made that, and it probably would have passed this time.
Yeah,
because
that's right. That's right.
And now you could see where it went in Missouri, trending politics. Listening to the voter, understanding Main Street versus K Street or High Street is so important. And you got to know your Main Street. And our Main Street was changing, and nobody was listening for those years. So to say, is it legal?
But I'll defend the
it
Cardians.
Definitely won't. Well,
I'll defend the Cardians. They put it before a vote.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody got their say. I mean, that's how we don't have wars in this country. Is we put it before a vote, right? And it lost.
The Constitution had a provision, like Illinois, that said no concealed. It didn't say no concealed carry. It said this doesn't mean you can have concealed carry. So you shall have the right to bear arms, very similar to the federal Constitution. But this doesn't mean you can carry concealed. In other words, legislature, you can create a law if you want that. That's the first legal definition. Then there was the vote of the people.
Carrie Engel just texted me. I got a great Carrie question. So
yeah,
I got to come up this day, because of Rod, and it was just total luck. It was like toward the end of session, right?
Right.
So the bill comes from the House. It's debated. It's filled by laid it over. Maybe one surprise. I don't remember all.
This is when it was going to be third read and move through.
And
you watched the House vote.
Everybody, and I had just seen PQs in the House. I didn't pay much attention to the Senate because Mark Richardson was a House person. Rob was a House person. I didn't really go over there because it was a world that I didn't understand. But I go into this chamber, and I mean, it's like a freaking funeral. I mean, the place, there's everybody.
In the Senate or the House?
No, in the
Senate. Yeah, because there was cheering in the House.
I mean, you walk into this gallery, right?
Yeah,
and I don't know really but I know something's weird. This is not normal.
You walked in on them about to break the Jacob filibuster with Kasky, a Democrat.
And all of you
handling,
in your seats, right?
Yes, we are all there.
There's
Nobody's
34 seats.
And we've all signed the PQ. 21 of us or more, 23 or whatever, have signed the PQ, including Democrats. No, not at all for that issue. That had to be done to stop Jacob. I sat right next to Jacob. I personally chose the seat next to Ken Jacob because, and he had a tough filibuster. We had big time debates.
He was having a filibuster like this, right?
And we had a lot of fights in our day.
There's one difference is Terry Spieler, you did not break the plane with those shoulders. She taught you all exactly.
Yep. And my chief of staff, Patrick Baker, is now now the administrator of the Senate.
That's
and
right.
others that we knew were clerking it.
I tell you, I have watched the shoulder plane be a little more lax when Miss Spieler was there. That shoulder plane.
Well, anybody on the dais. You know, Kinder had Churchill quotes and a lot of bearing. He was a neat guy to be running that dais, and
at a historic time.
And it was an historic day.
What was it like sitting in your chair? Harold Kasky, who Republican Democrat, was respected.
Visually impaired for our friends, one of the biggest geniuses ever. Had a reader. Had a reader
in a wheelchair, right?
No, not at the time.
Not at the time. Okay, he comes out
for some peripheral vision, and
I remember his hand, and I knew who Harold Kasky was, right? But I didn't know him. But he comes out,
one of the greatest ever.
Totally respected. You could just tell.
Yeah, he's one of those ones you'd want to do a portrait of.
You could parachute in from Wisconsin, not know anything about this place. Okay, that's a big deal. Whoever that guy is, everybody kind of treats him. And I just remember seeing his hand, and I. To me, he could have been in ill health. It could have been all this, but it was shaking. And I remember the whole place is silent
because of that action.
All the staff are in their desk. Every senator's in their desk, which is not normal.
It was like 35 years since the last PQ.
And he makes this motion, and it passes. And I mean, it was a bizarre world.
It was the start of a change, and then the bill passes. Holden vetoes as expected.
So tell me, this concealed carry bill passes the legislature to a absolute certain veto, and you have obligations to the United States of America, to our country, to serve.
I had served in a previous special session when I went to the captain's career course for the military police, so I had to rush back here in '99. In 1996, my brother was married in Ireland. Marriage lasted less than the trip, but I didn't worry about going. I had to stay for the partial birth. I had to stay for the partial birth override, and that never came over. So the biggest pressure for me, the thing for me was that I was not going to break ranks and go home, even with an approved leave, unless it got through the House. Because I saw that in 1996 with partial birth. I'm sitting in my chair voting for something, and then it dies in the Senate. So I knew that I'm not coming over. I'm not getting into this mess unless it's happening.
And if I recall, that summer, heat was turned up on those suburban Republicans.
It was turned up on about 3 different people in particular had a critical role. Gibbons' district had voted 70% for the 99 initiative.
Gibbons is such a solid guy that you just kind of think if he voted for it in session, I always thought, and not knowing him better now that I didn't, look at that guy, whatever he decides, he's solid. You ain't gonna
His quotes were awesome. The things he said in this book and in the Senate.
Colleagues, there were a lot of, there wasn't a 4-0 conclusion. They spiked it in the House, but they did. I mean, there wasn't a big majority either.
They got it done.
They got it through. So,
and then it comes to the Senate. We have that debate. It's signed. Then the pressure's on.
Guantanamo. Why? What was?
I was deployed during Operation Enduring Freedom, and in my National Guard
Haiti,
career,
or what was that?
No, that was Iraq. And the detainees. We had 600 detainees.
And so your job was
in Guantanamo, public affairs. No, CIA was there, but public affairs. Okay. I was doing the base newspaper, media relations. We'd have Miami Herald telling us we were killing everybody. We'd have the Fox News saying hit them again. We'd have everybody visiting, and we'd have to conduct the operations for the many troops that were there. Now, there's only a handful left at these camps, and then it was the height of it.
To be fair, you were doing something that
I was a major.
You could take
commander of a public affairs detachment,
and it is not as though serious breaches. You weren't in a situation where you were standing a post at that time.
My unit was journalists, media relations people, photographers, and others that fell in on a lieutenant colonel, female lieutenant colonel, Pam Hart, and I brought my entire unit under her, and we operated with.
I don't want to get into stuff you can't talk about. I don't even know what to ask to avoid that. So you just tell me. But so you know when veto session is, right? It's always the same time every year. You know you're deployed. Mm-hmm. You could do the math on this vote, right?
Right. Gibbons is getting pressured, and Matheson, the late Jim Matheson. We just mentioned Caskey, Matheson, and maybe like Kinder. If you're going to do 3 photographs and paint 3 more senators, you'd have to do J.T. Russell or Kinder. You'd have to do Matheson or Caskey.
Yeah.
If you were going to add to that collage of these great senators, right? So that's going on. So Matheson's got to go. He was for concealed carry. He's got to go against a Democratic governor. That's against every fiber of his being. Gibbons has to flip on his district, but he gave such a great speech saying this is not going to cure all crime, and this is not going to be the Wild Wild West. 20 years hence, he's completely accurate, and he's still the great guy that he is. And he ran strongly as an attorney general candidate. And when he got off his bus, he sounded like a John Ashcroft. But he's still kind of a moderate conservative guy and a wonderful guy.
But that, I think, is what put him on his path to Senate leadership and running.
And he was my mentor in the House. They sat him next to me because they said, "Who's going to take on Dolan?
You got a good pull.
Who's going to take Dolan?" He's so energetic, New Yorker, excitable guy. And Griesheimer and Gibbons were there to make sure I followed in the line. Yeah, and then you had
So how do you go tell your superior officer, "Hey, I've got to go vote"?
I just made a request, and she said, "You're going to have to see the colonel, who's a full colonel from the Michigan Guard, who had the detainee unit." And I was being watched by a Michigan Guard 1-star general who was in charge of the detainee operation because he was a county sheriff. He was watching the fact that I was a public employee. And I was also doing duty. He was watching my case when it later went to the Pentagon, was the subject of War College papers, and became this big Dolan rule of what public employees can do while they're also mobilized.
So other people have done the math, and they can read the paper. And
some people say I was sent away. I was in command. They knew I'd go on command. They knew I'd be deployed because they get the schedule. I don't know if the
Republican administration, right?
Well, no, it was Holden's administration, of course, and it was Holden's guard chief.
Bush was in the White House, right?
No, you never really went to that. Bond and Blunt made nice comments. Matt Blunt, as Secretary of State, made a good comment because he had served in the Navy in London while he was so it all became that was the aftermath. The actual vote was interesting because staffers matter. Trent Watson and Jeff Davis. He was my chief of staff, and Jeff Davis was Kinder's chief of staff. And you know what? You got an Anheuser-Busch right now. Nobody will order a Bud Light, right? Maybe. Well, guess what? Who paid for the jet? Anheuser-Busch, the chief himself, was the impetus of doing it. And that became an ethics complaint later, is how did I get home? Not just how did I get leave.
So did you tell the guys that they say, "I've got to go catch this plane, I'll be right back"?
I did a formal leave request, got no special treatment. Everything went great. In the end, they gave me a letter of admonition, enough to ruin my career.
Would you fly to Miami?
Yeah, I went to Miami on a regular little puddle jumper with your knees to your chest commercial flight, and then I was picked up as if I was a U.S. senator by
commercial flight stop at Guantanamo.
There was this one little commercial that I was allowed to take to get to Lauderdale, and at Lauderdale I got on a private jet. And it's the first time I was ever on a private jet. We went wheels up, and I landed here, and you had Jeff Davis and Trent Watson meeting me on the airport tarmac, and nobody knowing. So that next morning on radio, it was "Good morning, Jeff City. John Dolan's back," and here it comes. And then Caskey and Claridge joking about me parachuting in through the dome, Roy Temple trying to assault me in a hallway, things going on, people getting into it. It was something. The aftermath, my case, that's not important. Talk about what's important is the people and the vote.
I've heard what their critiques. We're going to try to keep it short, but before we get into the last bit, I still am a Bud Light guy.
I'm just saying, the Bush family ended up being one of the ones that provided Senate Majority Fund enough money to pay for the plane. It was all to get and do your duty. It was not a campaign. In the end, my campaign
has a
paid
nice
for it.
Story here that turns, but this is we're on the 20th anniversary here. This is a Stein that was sent to me by a good friend of mine in Herman, talking about the racist policies of Prohibition from 33 when the Clydesdales brought the first beer from St. Louis. And I got my buddy Jason from back in McDonald County. You know, MoDOT left McDonald County off the map once, and Judge Russell had to go down and personally accept McDonald County's reentry. Until then, you have a McDonald County visa. So when you come through, you get it stamped. Thank you, buddy. I love these. I appreciate them. Also, Jim Badgley. I bet you nobody's enjoying Old Senate Stories more than Jim Badgley at United Electric. Thank you for the hospitality the week before last. I really appreciate getting to interview Schmidt there at the co-op. And then, obviously, you're going to stay in Jeff City, Courier by Marriott. Don't screw it up. Don't go JB. So you're there that morning. Everybody knows Senate convenes at 10 or noon. I guess it would have been.
Probably never had shorter hair or a lighter, more fit body because I was on duty.
Bill shoots over. You're sitting there waiting.
I had come up for a session had to vote some economic development sessions. So I knew I had to get in and vote and do both. I had done both before. I'd been a citizen soldier. It was my other job since 1999. I rejoined the Guard, and I would make.
So everybody pat you on the back, right?
Well, everybody was happy I was there, and things started to get intense on the floor. Me and Jacob, me and Maida, others. Maida and I are friends to this day. But it was a very intense day.
Ride if you'd have reshuffled it. I mean, it was the same.
Yeah, Caskey was like my hero, and talking about it in more of a fun way. That I was there, and he came over on the pro-life 24-hour waiting period before an abortion vote. He voted for that, and that made that pass by 2 votes instead of 1. That was Billy Lichtenhouse's bill on an abortion issue.
We've talked about Democrats getting a little far afield, right? Caskey, if you had people, if Harold Caskey was the center of the Democrat Party today, I don't think it works because nationally they're just going to beat the hell out of you.
There are modifications or things at both parties that are definitely disrupting that you never thought would happen.
St. Charles County.
St. Charles County.
You flipped it. You were right there, the epicenter of flipping seats, picking up seats, the growth.
Ted's still a proud Democrat, went out as a proud Democrat, but was a tough conservative ordering judge. Billy Lichtenhouse is probably claiming Republican turf and has relatives in his family tree spinning in their graves. We're all different.
When you talk about some of the more radical parts of the Republican Party today, St. Charles County has almost become a joke about, get all their stuff vetoed. It's becoming, when you start talking about, when you ask the question that nobody at Camp Carnahan asked in the late 90s. Guys, these folks in Jeffco are Catholic. Are we going too far here? Or is this a little much here? Are we, wait a minute. I think folks in St. Charles County like guns. Why are we, I'm pretty sure nobody in St. Louis City is going to stop carrying a gun if we pass it or not. But guys, are we sure that maybe
Ted House and Billy Lichtenhouse were the major pro-life sponsors
on the death penalty? That Jay Nixon, he seems to get a few votes.
Lacey would always bring up the ban
because maybe there's nobody saying, "Hey, you know what? Steve Butts on the Democrat side, he's pretty well." Or that Eric Schmidt, he gets a lot of votes. Do you think there's some folks in the Republican Party that have long since forgot everything we're talking about? And they don't stop and think, you know what, maybe there's a few women who think rape and incest is a reasonable reason to get an abortion, right or not?
That maybe in a legal definition, there should be an exception or should not be. I see what you mean. Or that
some of the stuff we're doing, maybe we're getting past kind of what the folks thought they're voting for. And we're getting into some territory that may be a little out from where the state is.
What I'll say is that
just like the Democrats,
the ideology you can never really control because both parties have become more extreme. But sometimes you'd see a good old boy from the rural part of the state, and he'd say, the only thing in the middle of the road is roadkill. Maybe it's more about governance than it is somebody's ideology. Letting a bill go through, centering yourself and not filibustering your own or somebody else's, or taking a hostage just for the sake of it, letting something happen, just sit down, just let others govern, let somebody take a turn. Maybe it's more about how we got along as kids or adults and letting someone have their turn. In St. Charles' case, I'm an 18-year Jeff City resident since my trade association days, and leaving the Senate. Did being a little too Army for the Senate and a little too Senate for the Army have a play in me leaving both? Yes, but I went on to a great trade association executive career. I've now done this year twice as long as I did my legislative years. So I'm just happy to be a part of it. But yes, did I like when Bearden was writing the budget, and so was Gross, and I was on transportation as a new chairman, majority party, and a senator all in the same day.
It feels like it is a long way in St. Charles County from Chuck Gross.
Well, that's a large delegation of great people, some of whom I don't know.
Carl Bearden's a long way from Carl Bearden sometimes.
Yeah, everybody's different. I'm just meeting some of these folks, but it went from Dolan to Roop to Onder to now Schroer, which is a good name in St. Charles County, and they've cut up that district. Then you have Elman to Gross to Dempsey to Eigel.
With Schroer, I think you might be seeing.
I'd love to meet him.
A little bit of a.
And Travis Fitzwater has a piece of the district.
He does.
And I talked to him about that because I ran in Lincoln County.
One of the more intelligent folks.
I was one of the first Republicans to get a certain percentage in Lincoln County.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah, and I got 47% and knew I'd win the race the minute that happened.
I'm getting the furrowed brow from Kelton. But I do think with Schroer, maybe you're seeing a little bit of that where it did go pretty far as far as temperament. The actual votes in the Senate, that's not important. But actually how you work with your fellow senators, what gets to a vote. Nick Schroer has a reputation for being able to work with people in a little different way than Senator Onder did.
Right.
And I wonder if there's not we went this far, now we're going to come back just a little bit.
I love those personalities. I love meeting people like Southwest Missouri. I met one of the first senators I met of the new crew was Curtis Trent, great guy.
Oh,
a very interesting thing. I've worked with Lincoln Huff in the past, so I see what's coming. And in my home county, I think what you're seeing is the diversity of a power center.
If you can put up with Lincoln, then you're doing fine. I think, but I also look to the future. I look at Phil Cristomelli. I always make fun of him, too conservative for intelligence, but the fact is will be a fantastic senator. Yeah. The temperance he carries, he'll be one that is very good.
The Senate's always important because they say there's 35 senators, the Speaker of the House, and the 34 senators. Yep. That's the saying, and as long as that is it, it's going to be there. Yeah, Carrie's great. She's terrific. I know her. I met her through you.
If this goes a little too far here, right? You have Boone County's gone, right? You never could win Boone County alone, right? That's going to be what it's going to be.
Is that rewritten to a D seat? You think?
It grew enough to where you couldn't split it by the statute.
So now it's going to probably go D, and Stephen Weber's ramped up. And
the Democrats could cut him up. They could go Missouri Democrat on themselves, which is not unusual.
He's working hard, and his professor.
I think 8 years from now they'll have a whole 8 years from now after they've had the seat for 8 years. Then they'll cut each other up in a primary, and it'll be a bloodbath, and it'll be interesting. But
right now you see it as a turn.
Yeah, if independents can hold,
and that's Caleb's seat.
I actually think independents may not hold, but I think what you're saying is
50-50 fight.
Yeah,
or
and independents,
or a lean D fight, or a lean R fight.
I think it's a toss up.
It seems like it.
Our people. Well, I'll tell you what.
One of few.
The independents people. It was maybe 55-45. Trump brought along another 5%. Will they show up and vote without Trump and independents? That's a real question. Eric Mullins is a really good candidate. Robbie Saul is a good candidate.
Interesting.
If Trump's on the ballot, I think it's a lean R. If Trump's not, will those folks show up and vote for Ted Cruz talking about?
I was always in swing seats, so I watched the ones. I know the Searpoys real well because their seats were always tight, like mine.
The woman in Lee Summit that thinks abortion, she calls it healthcare. I wonder if she doesn't vote for Carrie Engel over Jeff Coleman, over Dan Stacy, because they'll have.
And what was Carrie's question?
She's talking about her fundraiser actually, but it reminded me of her.
That's good. She's a Democratic state rep.
Yeah,
she's doing great.
Probably the front runner to run for that Senate seat. You got Jeff Coleman there. You got I think John Patterson hasn't warmed to running yet. You've got Dan Stacy. They're going to fight it out.
I was impressed with her and others when I went. You asked about the minority. I'm going to say something about the minority that I think is great. I remembered myself working hard, going to class, doing great committee work. And you know what was great? I went into utility committee as a new guy to a new area in solar energy, and I looked up there and I see people doing good work. I see people. I meet people through you and others, and you see people like Crystal and others doing great work. and being terrific. So I was able to do that because I had to work on both sides when I was in the trade association world, and we raised a lot of money and spent a lot of money. I probably, between Jersey and Missouri, had to raise more money for Democratic governors than Republicans, because that's who I worked with in those two states in my 8 years here, 7 years there. But what you like about somebody and what you know is different than politics. So when 17 came and Murphy was getting blasted in Jersey and Virginia was taken, I was loving it as a Republican. And I don't see any problem whatsoever with Youngkin and his people and speaking up for parents. So governance is governance. You got to govern, you got to listen, and you got to know what's going on in politics. You certainly do. And I appreciate you taking some time to look 20 years back and to say, hey, no matter what the gun laws are today, right, wrong, or indifferent, we had the right to do something, and it's worked out. It's worked out in concealed carry world that it's not the Wild West, like Mike said, and it's not reducing crime, but people feel really great. And that's it. Mike Gibbons was right. Matheson did the right thing, and I'm proud to have served in some small way to do what I did.
The only part I look back on is that PQ.
There's been a few since, but they're still rare.
Too many?
Depends on the issue and the timing and how bad the Senate gets. I'm lucky that I left, and the last person I put on my district newsletter was smiling Jason Crowell. I didn't know you'd have about 20 of them in the Senate fighting with each other 10 years later. But Jason will tell you the same thing. And sometimes you got to fight like Jacob and Crowell and I did, and others. I always work with people. I eventually sat down. I talked too much, but I enjoy, and I entertained, and I stood up, and they used me as a fighter against Ken Jacob in my early days. And then in 2005, it was easy with Matt, because Matt was signing all the good stuff we were putting through. Then they worried about me being too tight with my new senator friend, Chris Koster, who was a Republican state senator at the day. So then he runs.
Did we know 10 years later, he'd be the Republican running as the Democrat.
Right. And in a world. Yeah. And I had a good leader in my association. He said, who's going to be the next governor? Well, Chris Koster looks like, he says he sounds like Barry White. He raises millions of dollars, and he looks like Robert Redford. Who do you think is going to be the next governor? I walked into a bank the morning before the election. I walked into the bank the morning before the election. I heard about how far Trump was up, and a consultant told me we're going to take every single seat, and it's going to be that way for a decade or two. And now I think he's right. So now we got to govern.
That's right.
Got to take care of highways. Got to take care of people. Got to be balanced. Doesn't mean you got to give up. You just got to sometimes give in to one's own selfishness or the next election and just try to govern for the benefit of the people in Missouri.
Isn't a pack to do stupid things.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure sometimes.
And you're a strong advocate of that balance. You're our Joe Rogan.
Well, the Facebook likes are great, but I don't know that you want to if you're a House member and you want attention, filing a House bill is fine to get attention, but you don't actually put that into law.
I saw one that was really conservative. But what I liked about him was how well he did his committee work and others. And he's he's already a star in the House, and he does great things. It was, I saw Richie do great work on a task force, yet he also blew up the budget on the DEI and does these things as pastor.
Say he didn't blow it up. I think Lincoln Huff would say he did a great job.
But isn't that what is supposed to happen? And didn't Lincoln and,
I'll tell you my take on that was that I know we got to go, but my take on that was that's not Doug Ritchie's fault. He's running for Senate. He's trying to get attention.
And he also believes in it. He believes in it. And
whatever.
Yeah.
But that's the fault of the chairman.
But it got fixed. We got a budget.
Well, they didn't get fixed. They got their budget shredded,
then we got the budget.
Might have happened anyway. I don't think that's the fault.
But no special session. The budget got done.
Of course not. But you took a hand that was to me, if I was sitting on that budget committee, I went to all those hearings.
I would have hammered that down.
The House budget.
I would have cut a deal.
You learn more about state government in the House budget than you anywhere else,
because that's where the work is done.
Hours and hours of work, just all trashed for some stunt, and that is not the fault of the guy running for Senate. The guy running for Senate is supposed to do stunts to get attention. It's the fault of the chairman. The chairman should have said, "Hey, Bud, we've done a lot of work on this, and actually, their budget was getting praise from people that don't normally praise it."
Right.
And I'm not sure the Senate was as confident. They were just going to.
It was a surprise.
They always were. And then, so you just take all that work and just throw it away. The speaker should have stepped in and said, "Whoa! This is a fine stunt. It's a fine thing for you to talk about and bring back next year.
But the way to do it is different."
And if that even the floor, they said, "Whoa, guys, why do we look like clowns again? We've lost this 4 years in a row. Wait, 5."
What I'm saying is,
if I was the Senate, I'd been sending them donuts and saying, "Go, please put this in there," because all it did, it took that budget and just kind of went like this. And Lincoln sat there and laughed and smiled and wrote the budget by himself.
And I think, but
that's not Doug Ritchie's fault.
No, that's exactly my point. I'm on a task force last year, seeing the guy work his ass off and think outside the box and meet it head on when somebody was accusing government of dastardly things, and he takes right off. So I remembered and liked that side of it. We can see different sides of different politicians and different parties, but the problem is if you don't subject or subservient get subservient with yourself a bit and let the other guy or the other gal do something, you don't get the governance you need. And sometimes you need to say, I'm going to blow up the whole budget. I better not do this. Instead of multiple special sessions, multiple PQs since my day over issues that are not even as close to as important as the ones were.
Yeah,
and that's tough.
I mean, well, I think if Doug Ritchie is a senator, you're going to get to see.
Right.
Is your gut about his temper,
but he's
right?
Too.
Or is it not? And we could all sit here with our thoughts on it. The truth is, we'll the great thing about politics, the thing I like about politics, almost like baseball. At the end of the game, there's going to be a scorecard, right?
Yeah.
At the end of session, they're going to be like, okay, you did these things that were bizarro and people remember, or you went in there and, I mean, everybody thought Ben Brown was going to be terrible. Yeah. Ben Brown's a very good senator.
What's interesting about politics is I think of the true. I love the 3 baseball movies, Field of Dreams, Love of the Game, and Burl Durham, and Kevin Costner's in all of them, right?
Waiting for Bull Durham.
Yep, you got to have Burl Durham in there. So it's the lead, and you go in there, you look at that. But I like people. Think of Moneyball. I like people who get on base. I like when things get done, and you're going for an ultimate prize, and sometimes you're going to be just short of that. So if you look at Moneyball and you understand the issues, you can look at politics the same way. Who gets on base? Am I going to flip my roster like Neon Dion just did in Colorado and win my first game? Maybe he wins nothing else, but he just upheld the entire college. That was the biggest upset and the biggest talk delivered by his own son. That's a story. And we had a story 20 years ago that led to people, one on the hip, one on the ankle, and probably an AR if you're Munslinger, and you're able to sling all those weapons you want and do whatever you need to against tyranny or for self-defense at home in your car, and you're able to do it safely. So when you bring it around, hopefully they'll approach the same decisions on vetoes, specials, and other things the best way they can. I sense what you're telling me and what you've seen more than I've ever seen and more than most people watching Missouri politics, because you're our guy to do it. It's just not sometimes getting there, and maybe we need to revisit that.
My take is, like all of culture, we want to be on our phones right now, get attention. That culture is seeped into the House, but the House is made for that. It's made to be heavy-handed and trans-run. It's not made for the Senate. The most important institution this state has by a factor of 10 is the state Senate, and the most important function is the free and fair debate.
It'll get there. It'll get back.
And PQing things is a easy, cheap way. It's the Kardashian way to govern. I think, I have seen PQs that seem justified to me when Tom Dempsey had a deal on an abortion bill in session that was not held up in veto session. And they were going to lose their. I thought that was a very justified reason. Remember Jed Beck?
That was the whole Medicaid issue.
Jed Beck took off with a bill. Yeah. I thought that was I wasn't here for that, but I thought that sounded justified. There are very rarely justifications for that. And I think, it's on both the leadership and the minority to figure out how to not do those. But always wonder, every one of those you do is like you just chisel a little bit off that capital. And
well, there's lions in the Senate, but there's sharks in the Senate.
I think Kenneth Brown could leave his time in leadership without a PQ. Him and Rizzo, he made
a concerted effort on that.
What an amazing accomplishment for an amazing statesman, for Rizzo and Rowden to be able to say we left without smearing the Senate. But we could talk all day, and we'll have to kick this up with the bar later. But thank you all for watching. I'm not sure who's on the show Sunday. I usually know, but we're going to be back tomorrow with a guest around 11ish. So join us then. Thank you so much. Appreciate the Stein. This is a great Stein. This is an anti-racism Stein to remind folks of the racist prohibition that came in after World War I. Thank you guys again. We will see you tomorrow and for sure Sunday.